Now is okay?
Yes, you're on live.
Yes, sir.
Let's go. Start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Ali, we're on. It's really nice to talk with you today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience and explain what we're going to be doing today?
Yes, my name is Ali Javan Mardi. I was born in Kurdistan of Iran, 1975. When I was 17 years old, I joined to politics, and it's a long story if I want to say. And in 1994, I fled from Iran, and then when I was at that time 19 years old, I joined to Radio Kurdistan of Iran. It was in northern Iraq, and Radio Kurdistan of Iran broadcast the realities of Iran and Kurdistan at that time. And but my career journalism started in 1994. From that time until now, over the past, especially 16 years, I have developed an extensive network of news source, and I contacts throughout the Middle East and North Africa, especially journalists and even politics and leaders. This has helped me land interviews, some very exclusive with many Middle Eastern leaders. I was correspondent for Radio Free Liberty, Radio Farda by Persian languages from 2004 to 2008 for 5 years. I was correspondent in Erbil, in Kurdistan of Iraq, in Baghdad, in Ankara, in Turkey for Radio Free Liberty. And then I was anchor person in VOA, Voice of America. And after I became correspondent during ISIS war in Iraq and Syria, I worked with VOA about 12 years, and several times I was in front line in Mosul, front war with ISIS, against ISIS. That's it, maybe. This is enough.
Well, that's extraordinary. And if my math is correct, you were doing this from age 19. What gave you such a passion to do this important and sometimes dangerous work?
I love my job, but more than this, think my personal mission, this is a kind of mission for me, is establishing freedom and democracy, rule of law. I think about a new country, new system in Iran, and this has pushed me to do more for broadcasting the truth, for helping and fighting for freedom and democracy.
Do you think that it's a dream that can come true in your lifetime and my lifetime for Iran and the Iranians?
I can say yes, of course. If not, I can't work, I can't fight.
Tell me
Without hope, we cannot.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me why you have that hope and that optimism for that cause. Just give me some data points that help me understand why you are, in fact, hopeful.
You know what? Mullahs and religious element establishment are occupied Iran in past 42 years. And they have taken freedom and everything's actually from all people by name of God. I think as human being, I have duty to fight this injustice. And why? It's very simple. When I look other countries, they have freedom, they have everything. Why we don't have it? And we can have it, I think. We deserve to have it, our people. That's why I want to establish a country of law and equality, freedom of religion, to observe human rights and secularism. I am impressed by the American Constitution, American citizenship, and American founders of Jefferson. Why we can do that? We can have a good country, a good law in Iran, a good system in Iran.
Tell me, Ali, we had 4 years of the Trump administration. Now we have the Biden administration. How does that, if at all, change the dynamic for what's happening in Iran? Does it make it more likely or less likely for forces that are fighting for more freedom and liberty to prevail? How does that? Did things change, and if so, how?
Let me say the maximum pressure, I think, the maximum pressure by the President Trump administration weakened the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I think it was very good. That's why, let me explain it. The maximum pressure put Iranian regime financially in position that they were not able to finance proxies to terroristic groups like Hezbollah, like PMF, like other terroristic groups around the world, especially in the Middle East. To my belief, the policy of maximum pressure brings the positive response. In the past 4 decades, the policy of appeasement about Iran has not worked. Why? Mullahs become more violent and more aggressive in the region. Look, for example, you talked about President Biden. Okay, President Biden spoke softly to accommodate Iran. What was response? What was response, I ask? Response was negative. We see by attack in Erbil and Baghdad, and just today in Ain Assad, they attacked military base, American military base in northern Baghdad. Also, they have increased the Iranian nuclear enrichment, nuclear uranium and production and other nuclear production and other nuclear activities. What happened? But I want to say the same time, I want to tell you that the policy of President Trump was short of pursuing the regime change in Iran. I believe that the President Biden right now can correct this shortcoming by pursuing to change the system in Iran. The same thing that Iranian people wants to do that. President Biden cannot negotiate with the terrorist regime in Tehran to bring stability in the region, in the Middle East. It's impossible. The aim of terrorists cannot change, for sure. This is my opinion, actually. I do hope that the President Biden will not release any funding to this terrorist regime. The only thing they will do with the money, we saw it before, to support the terrorist groups around the world, especially in the Middle East. We have the experience of President Obama presidency, that the money released spent for terrorists, not for people of Iran.
What do you think the likeliest scenario, if you were to advise President Biden on what the United States should and shouldn't do to try to bring about the change that you are struggling for, what would be your prescription for him? What would you suggest?
Let me explain it by a simple example. For example, nuclear issue is very important in Iran, and all countries talk about it. The nuclear technology can be obtained from the US or any Western country. But the question is, why do they secretly work with North Korea? Why? Because they want to make nuclear weapon. A regime that kills its own people every single days, I tell you, cannot be trusted, cannot be trustable. And if they have nuclear weapon, what will happen? You can imagine. The regime killed more than 1,500 of its own innocent people in just 2 days in November 2019, and 2 years ago. And the same time, and then denied it. I mean, they lie easily. The Western world cannot and must not trust this horrible lying. I think the aim of the Islamic Republic of Iran obtain nuclear weapon and certain and actually become to a country like in Northern Korea and for international scene, and after put its own people in total isolation. And at this situation, how can President Biden say we want to have negotiation with this regime and make a deal with them?
Right.
I think Iranian people don't think this deal it does work.
So tell me what should Biden do? What should he do?
This is good question.
Yeah.
This is good question. I think President Biden can support Iranian people. President Biden can change policy, and even President Trump had this policy, change behavior. For changing behavior in Iran, they had a policy in foreign policy. The same policy we see right now. President Biden tried to make a new deal with Iran. Okay, it's okay. Why for just one time in 4 decades they don't test this new policy by name of regime change, or support Iranian people, support struggle for freedom inside Iran, support Iranian independent journalists, support freedom of speech in Iran. And I mean, U.S. can do that, can make a change in foreign policy about Iran. Right. And it does work better than ever, I think.
I follow you. I'm curious about the specifics, though. What would be, how could the United States, President Biden, the United States government support the people of Iran? What could he do?
How could this is easy? Let me turn. Not just. Let me explain some more, David. Western democracy is an ideal for future of Iran. It's not my opinion. I think mostly of Iranian people wants to do that. Iran has a young population eager to get freedom, secular, and democracy. If the Western world support the aspiration of Iranian people, Iran will able to move forward to be a democracy society. I mean, Iranian people need moral support. With Western moral support, Iranian can handle their own destiny. This is the best way. With no war, with no anything, with no any dangerous plan.
Right. So it's moral support and that sort of thing. Now, you talked a little bit about the fact that there is, Iran seems to be moving again towards creating a nuclear weapon. At least that's what some of the reports indicate. There's a lot of speculation that if push comes to shove, Israel might take it upon itself to destroy the nuclear facilities or the nuclear bomb-making capacity of Iran. Do you think that might happen? And if it did happen, what do you think would happen in response from Iran?
About Israel, I do not believe that Israel will attack Iran. Let me explain why. I worked here maybe about 20 years. About the Middle East. I know all countries. I want to explain that the best policy for Israel regarding Iran is a weak and isolated Iranian regime. The only fear Israel has that Iran gets nuclear weapon. That's true. But the policies of Iran led Arab countries establish peace with Israel. The policy of Iran led for a weakened Syria, Bashar Assad, next enemy neighbor to Israel. But if I say, your question, if I say if that war happened, for example, if that war happened, I believe that my belief is Iran will not be able to react directly against Israel. Why? You can see right now the power of Iran is based on his proxies and terrorist groups, Hezbollah, Jihad al-Islami, PMF in Iraq, Popular Mobilization Forces, and others. They can make missile attack to Israel. That's true. They can make trouble for Israel. Such an attack by Israel will lead to destruction of the Islamic Republic. Iranians who have been suppressed and frustrated by regime will rise against the mullahs, against the old regimes. That's why Israel attack on IRGC and Iranian proxies in Syria every week. Maybe there is about 500 times since 2011 until now. I don't say that, Israelis said that. But Iran had not shown any reaction or denied the attack. Why? Because they cannot do anything against Israel directly. Iran is weak inside the Iran. Iran power is about terroristic group and proxies in outside.
Are you familiar, Ali, with the famous text, the famous book called The Art of War by one of the ancient Chinese authors? Have you ever heard of it? It's called The Art of War.
I heard that, but unfortunately I didn't.
Oh, it's okay. I mention it because one of the first principles in that book is they say, this advisor says, when strong, act weak. When weak, act strong. And I think if the mullahs are reading The Art of War, they're acting tough because they actually are weak inside. So that's kind of one of the observations I have about that.
The same thing, Iranian story. Okay.
Right. Ali, tell us, this is a very dangerous line of work you're in because, Iran certainly has some power, and they've certainly launched a vicious campaign against journalists that in any way don't toe the party line and adhere to the mullah's points of view. How worried are you for yourself to be such an outspoken journalist in conflict with this very vicious regime?
David, I'm under pressure to save my life. That's true, and my associate's life. Iranian regime has no tolerance for opposition inside and outside the country, especially about the journalists. They're afraid of journalists. They have murder opposition in and outside the country. I know all these dangers, but what can I do? I believe as a human, I have a duty, I told you, to carry on my beliefs, to save my nation, further destructions. There is no way. And this is not just about me, about, I can say, all journalists in Iran. This is nature of Iranian regime. Journalism has suffered heavily, and all Iranians' prisons are full of journalists. You can see that, a lot of names inside the prisons. The independent journalists who are alive today are those that were able to escape Iran. The current laws consider any criticism of the regime or any of its leaders high crime, punishable by long prison terms and even execution, because the regime consider itself proxy of God. Anyone who criticize the challenges it is considered the enemy of God, and therefore apostate and punishable by death. I know that, but there is no way. I should work without giving risk. You cannot do with anything, I think.
Right. Do you have any sense of how many journalists today in Iran might be imprisoned or otherwise in captive because of their attempts to conduct the practice of journalism in Iran?
More than 100 people, more than 100, but they don't say they are journalists. They say they are spy. They are work with Saudi Arabia, with Israel, with America, with CIA, with that. They don't call them journalists. They say they are spy.
Right.
There are more than 100 people right now, and thousands of journalists fled from Iran. And
Right.
during 3 years, since 2017 until now, 4 years.
What do you hear, Ali, from people? You must have sources inside Iran who are close, I would presume, to the government. What do they say about what's happening inside? What's being talked about in those? Are the mullahs worried? Are they? Are there any interesting, hopeful indications that there may be efforts to make it to lessen restrictions and create more freedom, or is it the opposite? What are you hearing from inside the regime?
You know, all depend to each other. Inside the regime, I told you, inside the regime, they are weak right now. That's why they try to make terrorist operation outside. One day, attack against U.S. base, against Saudi Arabia, against other countries, but at all, I think after President Trump, people of Iran, they have no good moral, but they thought President Trump tried to make change policy about Iran, and I didn't believe that, never. But this is mostly of Iranian people think they thought if Republicans became to power in the U.S. will be good for them. But I cannot say Iranian people right now itself can make any change. I think they need help
from the outside.
From the outside, even by moral, even by talking.
Mm-hmm. And tell me what, if you can, tell me what stories you're working on now that you think are most interesting and important for the world to know about this ongoing situation.
We have a network by name of AVA today, and we have been able to train and set up the largest network of independent volunteers, stringers inside Iran. We try to expand it, and at this situation we try to make something new about broadcasting news inside Iran. And like always, we published that we need supports towards training of independent journalists would be helpful for us. Right now, we're working like before, broadcasting news every day. At this situation, especially Iranian regime has very strong censorship, and we try to broadcast the truth for Iranian people at this situation.
What can be done to support more quality journalism, like the journalism you're doing about Iran?
I think any support towards training of independent journalists would be helpful for inside Iran, because we have no independent journalists inside Iran. Iranian regime arrests them. Iranian regime try to kill them, try to suppress them. That's why at this situation, as far as journalist activity out of Iran, there are many individuals and organizations actively reporting on Iran. But about inside Iran, we are poor. We try to expand this citizen journalism inside Iran. And because the Iranian regime considers a few these individuals, journalists, a real threat, and has actively pursued them abroad and threatened their lives. That's why we try to make a network of journalism inside Iran, citizen journalism by simple people, train them, and all will be under the radar, because this is against law by Iranian regime.
Right. What has been the effect of the killing of the journalist? I'm sorry, I should have his name right handy, but the Saudi journalist who was writing, sort of in opposition to the Saudi regime, was killed in Turkey. What was the effect of
Khashoggi.
that? Yes. What was the effect of that killing on these journalistic efforts, if any?
If you say Khashoggi, at the world maybe, not in our countries or in the Middle East countries, maybe everybody knows him. But about the Khashoggi, I mean the Saudi Arabia episode, that had it has different effect on Iranians. Why? Scores of Iranian journalists have been disappeared, executed, imprisoned, or had to flee the country with their lives. Not just in Iran, Iran is the huge prison for journalists. Over 30 journalists have had a similar fate in Turkey, not just in Iran. The same story in the rest of the Middle East. Now, The question for the Iranian people, you can see at the social media every day, this question, that say, what is the difference between all those murdered by their regimes and the one murder associated with Saudi Arabia? Why? This is big question. I think a kind of discrimination at the news too. What difference between that?
As if these lives are worth less than this other life, is what you're suggesting.
I think so.
I think that's a very interesting point. Do you have any role models for yourself in terms of what you're doing? Are there people who've inspired you to do the work that you're doing? And if so, who were they?
For myself, you mean?
Yes.
For myself?
Yes.
I think I want to establish a news for, I don't know how can I do that by news way to make a country of law and equality, freedom of religion, to observe human rights and secularism. I am impressed by, I told you, by Americans. I try to make create a country like America in Iran. Broadcasting is very important because that's why Iranian regime all the time try to censor, to have more and strong censorship. And by the way, I try to make something this way, to make freedom and democracy for my country. For my second country.
Was there someone who inspired you? Were there journalists that went before you that inspired you, or were there leaders who inspired you? I'm just wondering about your own inspirations that have inspired you to do what you're doing.
Yes, exactly. Yes, of course, I have this experience, but my goal is, I told you, is different. Without any impact, of pressure from outside, from anybody, without anything criticizing, I do my job. I do my best for this goal that I told you. And I told you I'm under pressure to save my life and my family in Iran under pressure. They arrest my mom. My mom has 72 years old and she's sick actually, and unfortunately she's under pressure, but without all this bad situation, I do my best in my job.
Well, it's enormously important work, and one of the reasons I was eager to conduct this interview was that I'm such an admirer of what you're doing, and I think everybody who believes in freedom of the press and freedom of speech and the free flow of truthful information should support you and all the people who are trying to do what you're trying to do. We built this platform, HAPS, in part because we want to empower the Ali Javanmardis of the world to bring these stories to the rest of the world. And we think that there's probably been a little too much gatekeeping on these stories, and the truth needs to go directly from the people who are on the ground, who really know what's happening and have the kind of connections you have, to the rest of the world. And we shouldn't be relying on any individual news network or organization to filter that for us and decide what we see and what we don't. If there was one thing that you feel that the rest of the world needs to know about this story, that they don't know or that they don't understand, what is it? What is that, Ali?
What was your question exactly? I'm sorry.
If there's one thing, most people in the United States, for instance, know very little about what's happening in Iran. They know very little about what's going on inside the country. It's a black box, as we would say. There's not much
That's true.
information
That's
coming out. So give us, if you just have a chance to communicate with all of the viewers that will see this about what they should know about the story, something that they should know but probably don't know or understand, what would that be?
That's true. Unfortunately, anybody inside the U.S. Don't know, or we can say don't have enough information about inside the Iran. One reason is that is the internet is filtered heavily in Iran, and all independent news channels are blocked, and all local even newspapers and magazines are heavily censored inside the Iran. It means one reason there is no any source, any trustable source inside the Iran. Second thing is I think Iran has very strong lobby inside the US for telling the non-true and give you different perspective from Iran. For example, the regime has hit squads trained to kidnap or murder opponents, including journalists abroad. You'll just talk about Khashoggi, but let me talk about the same thing like Khashoggi and worse than Khashoggi. And every year we have it. As an example, Ruhollah Zam. Ruhollah Zam was my friend. Ruhollah was learned from Paris, French, to Baghdad, kidnapped, taken to Iran, kidnapped and taken to, first of all, to Iranian embassy in Baghdad, and after taken to Iran, tortured, and finally stands to death and hanged. And only because he revealed the corruption of Supreme Leader and Supreme Leader's son. Who knows? Who knows his name inside the US? I think anybody. Why?
That's a great example, and that's one of the reasons I'm so glad that you're doing this, the reporting that you're doing, because we need to make more of the world aware of this. Ali, if it's okay, because I think you're on your phone and you probably can't read the comments so well, I'm going to read some of the English language comments because I'm afraid I'm not able to read the Farsi comments. But one of the viewers, Sardar, says, "We Iranians are all in debt to Ali for all the work he has done for us." And another says, "Let me say late at night, and otherwise it's late at night. Otherwise there would be thousands online for this interview." Well, luckily it will be available people will be able to watch the rebroadcast. Yes, and I did. One of our viewers has said, I was trying to get you to name one of the journalists who is doing this that you admire. Any other journalists who are in this field that you admire?
Thank you so much. Thank you. Actually, David, this perhaps is good opportunity to us. I think we can use that, and because by nature the Iranian regime does not tolerate any critique. That's why we should work from outside, and there is no other ways for inside. This is your apps. This application is good opportunity. Thank you for your opportunity. Thank you for your time.
It's a pleasure.
And
it's an honor.
We will try to have more program, more shows and lives in apps for Iranian people, especially for youth.
Good. I'm delighted to hear that. You mentioned, Ali, that you are from Kurdistan originally. I know that one of the controversial subjects in that part of the world is the desire of some Kurds for an independent state. What do you think of that desire, and do you think that will come about at some point or not?
Kurdistan, you think about which Kurdistan, which part of, because there is four parts of Kurdistan.
Right, exactly. And I'm just saying there are those who advocate for an independent Kurdish state of indeterminate boundaries, but independent from Iran or independent from Turkey. Is Is that movement gaining momentum? Do you think it will come about or not?
Let me say that Kurdistan was a part of Iran 500 years ago. At that time, Iranian kingdom lost at the war, lost a part of Kurdistan, a huge part of Kurdistan, by Ottomani. And then, in 100 years ago, Britain and French created Iraq and Syria. They separated two other parts from the first part of Kurdistan. Now we have four parts by name of Kurdistan. In Turkey, in Syria and Iraq, especially in Iraq, people of Kurdistan, they had referendum and they want to be independent. And this is true. In Iran, situation is different. I think if we have a democracy, if we have equality, if we have freedom, if we have a normal country, I think we can be together in united Iran without any request for separation. If not, by dictatorship, by continuing Iranian regime, yeah, of course, that part of people wants to separate from Iran. Day by day will be more, because they cannot imagine to stay under this pressure, under this discrimination, murdered every day, killing every day from Iranian regime. That's why this is we can say we have four different issues by name of Kurdistan. In Turkey is different with Iraq, Iraq is different with Iran, Iran is different with Syria. But the four parts by name of Kurdistan issue, Kurdistan problem, this is real. We have this problem.
Right. Somebody told me, one of our commenters, Tara Ney, said, David, you'll be shocked. You can't imagine what's going on in Iran. Certainly from the things that I read and hear from time to time, I certainly have cause for concern. One of the questions that sometimes comes up when people talk about the Iranian regime is total intolerance for LGBT rights and the LGBT community. What's the status of that today in Iran?
Iranian regime doesn't have tolerance for anybody. Iranian regime has tolerance for whose? For nothing. This is a dictatorship who say you must be with me, support me. If not, you are my enemy. You are against the God. That's it. Not LGBT.
Right.
Against all people. And I think American government, President Biden administration should think about a change policy about Iran.
Right. Of course, there was one attempt in recent history. The United States did attempt a regime change in Iraq, and brought one about, although it had ongoing ramifications and evolutions. As you look back on that, Ali, how do you interpret? Did the United States do a smart thing or a stupid thing, or something in between when it deposed the government of Iraq? And what, if any, lessons could you apply from that historical experience to the situation today with Iran?
David, the Iraq war was a big mistake for the US, even for Iraqi people. Why? Saddam Hussein, after the first Persian Gulf War, was weak and couldn't challenge the US interest in the Middle East countries. You cannot remember that Saddam was problem for the US after Gulf War. But removal of Saddam worked in favor of Iranian regime. Iran got a foothold in Iraq and continues to control Iraq, and murder of a lot of member of opposition, and especially Kurdish opposition in northern Iraq, and control to number of Shi'i militias. The U.S. paid heavy toll in blood and treasure without any gain. I think if the U.S. at that time, maybe they spent about 700 or 800, something like that, $700 billion. If the U.S. had spent just 1/10 of the cost of this war to the Iraqi people and opposition, they themselves would have changed Saddam Hussein. The same thing that we need right now for Iranian people, without no war. They spend a lot of money against Iran terrorism, Iran proxies at the Middle East countries. Okay, it's okay. Spend this money for Iranian people, for freedom inside Iran, for Iranian opposition. We can make change.
Right. Well, one of the reasons, I'm looking at this as an outsider, but it's no secret that there's a tremendous amount of brain power inside Iran. It's a country blessed with enormous resources, gorgeous environment for tourism. It seems like the potential of Iran is just massive and enormous. If a more liberal government was established, and if the true, if people could operate freely and in a safe and tolerant environment, it probably would become one of the world's wealthier and more prosperous countries, I would think, on the basis of the resources they have available. Do you think so?
I agree with you. I agree with you totally. That's true.
I would never go to Iran right now, obviously, but I'm dying to go. I have one ancestor on my family tree that was from Shiraz, so I've always wanted to visit. Of course, I won't visit under the current circumstances, but I wonder how many people there are out there, based on the photographs I see and the videos I see of what a beautiful country it is, that would love to visit and love to meet Iranian people and learn more about the culture and so forth. It's I join you in hoping for a future that's brighter and more open and more tolerant for the people there.
Yeah, exactly. David, Iranian people, you talked about Shiraz. Let me talk about Iranian people reverse to Iranian regime. They loves American, and they try to create a country like America. They're eager to make a country like America. This policy become from Iranian regime. Every day they have slogan against the U.S., but Iranian people loves U.S. and try to have a country such a United States. And I do hope a day we have a democracy in Iran and we make a normal country, we make a peace with our neighbors, with Israel, with all countries, and first of all with the US. We have good relations with the US.
Well, I hope so too. Ali, is there anything else you want to say before we wrap the broadcast?
Well, I'm sorry. What?
Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we end?
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry. I'm in the travel situation. That's why I have no my camera with myself. I have no any equipments. I have just a cell phone I'm talking with. I'm sorry about that. For next time, I'll be better. Thank you so much for everything, David.
It's such a pleasure, Ali. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you to the audience for all of your questions and comments. I'm sorry Ollie wasn't able to read them in real time, but I'm sure he'll be reviewing them on the rebroadcast. Thank you very much, Ollie. Godspeed to you, and stay safe, and keep on bringing us your valuable reports. We're honored to have you here on the HAPS platform.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure. Thank you.